Hi, my name is Joanne Rosen, and I am a practice professor in the Department of Health Policy and Management, and I have a joint appointment in the Department of Population, Family, and Reproductive Health.
What led you to studying these research interests?
A very circuitous route. Public health is a huge tent. In my case, I'm trained as an attorney, and I practiced human rights law in Canada, which is where I'm from, for many years. And I was particularly interested in the way that laws that discriminate affect populations of people. I did a lot of work on laws that particularly excluded or harmed LGBTQ people. And when I moved from Canada to the United States, I began to learn a lot more about the ways in which my work as a human rights lawyer was pretty much adjacent to a whole area of health policy in the public health area. So I never would have described my old work as public health adjacent, but it was very much public health adjacent. I had been involved in some of the early cases in Canada trying to expand marriage and benefits of marriage to same-sex couples. And I learned pretty quickly after moving to the US that same-sex marriage bans were a field of study for public health policy people. I also discovered that there were a patchwork of laws that restricted or otherwise limited access to abortion and had a pretty deleterious effect on the ability to exert control and agency over decisions about whether to have children and when to have children. And these were all areas of prior interest for me that I was then able to sort of shift the prism a little bit and begin to examine through a public health framework.
Why did you become a lawyer?
Oh, that's a great question. When I was in college, I was a psychology major, and then I went on to graduate school in psychology, at that point expecting that I would do experimental work on memory, more neuropsychology. And then be careful what you wish for, or be careful what you think you want to do. I started my master's program, and I was working in a lab where the PI did memory research, and I realized that as much as I found the theories of it fascinating, it was not the way I wanted to spend my life, sort of doing animal surgeries in a lab. I wasn't sure what to do next, and I had a boyfriend at the time who would later become my spouse, but he was going to law school, and he said, I think you'd be a great lawyer. I didn't know a single lawyer. I didn't know what lawyers did, but you didn't need any prerequisites, so I didn't have to go back and take courses. I applied to law school because I didn't know what else I might want to do, and I fell in love with rights and constitutional rights through law school. And then through my human rights work and I never thought that my background in psychology would be something I would mobilize, but my prior interests in stigma and the way that stigma affects people's mental health and physical health were elements of my background that I was able to then merge together with my legal expertise and bring both of those to bear in my work as a public health professor. Stigma is a public health issue. I didn't know that before I came here, but now I do.
What was it like moving from Canada to the United States?
I was in my early 40s, so I was born in Canada, educated in Canada. I had lived other places, but for short periods of time. I practiced law in Canada. So when we moved to the US, I had no idea how large a shift it would be. The countries always seemed super similar to me. We speak the same language, we have the same sociocultural references, we read the same things, but the cultures are the differences in culture are a lot greater than what I thought when I lived on the other side of the border.
What does your family think of your career path?
So that's a really great question too. When I decided to apply to law school, I think my parents were a little bit exasperated. It's like, oh, really? You've gone to graduate school and now you're going to do something else? And my grandmother, interestingly, said, who's ever going to want to marry you? You're just going to have so many degrees. So that was her generation. My other grandmother, who was older, for her, and she'd lived through the Depression, and her husband had died, and she was left with a lot of debt. She actually was she was in her 80s at the time that I was going to law school. She was so thrilled. And from whenever I would call her to check in or say hi, she would say, "How's my lawyer?" before I even started law school, just after I was accepted. So interestingly, that grandmother who was older understood the importance of education as a driver for economic independence. And my parents, they did come round. I think that their fears that I would be a forever student, always in school but never fully working, they got over that, and I think they were proud of my work. They were proud of my decision to go to law school, and I know they were proud of some of the cases that I argued.
What motivated you to focus on policies that affect LGBTQ people?
I get asked that question from time to time, and it's a hard one to answer. My initial attraction to what drew me to discrimination involving sexual and gender diverse populations was more visceral than anything else. I think that my head followed my heart. It wasn't the other way around. The very first case that I was given as a first year lawyer when I worked for an anti-discrimination organization was a case involving a lawyer himself, who worked for the Attorney General, so he was a government lawyer, and the government provided a range of health and other benefits to its employees, as well as to the spouses and children of employees. And the benefits program defined spouse as the person to whom you were legally married, as well as a common law spouse, someone with whom you weren't legally married, but with whom you lived in a common law relationship. And at that point in Canada and in the US, if you were gay, you couldn't marry legally because marriage was defined as a union between two people of different genders. But you could be involved in a common law relationship. And this person who filed the complaint was a gay man who had been living with his partner for many years. They were in a common law relationship, and he attempted to obtain benefits, employment benefits, for his common law spouse. And he discovered that common law relationships were defined as between two people of the opposite sex. So he was excluded from legal marriage definitions because the law didn't allow him to marry, but he was also excluded from having his common law relationship recognized because the benefits plan that the government offered said common law marriages were between people of the opposite sex. So he filed a complaint of discrimination and alleged that this was differential treatment on the basis of sexual orientation. That was the first case I was ever given on my first day of work. And I was actually stunned to see that the language of discrimination was explicitly written into the letter of the law. I thought, geez, I thought you'd be more subtle or more insidious, but there it was, incredibly blunt. And it very much reminded me of the civil rights struggle and the way in which racism in the US had been written into the very language of the law, where it was legally acceptable to discriminate based on race several decades ago. This is what the struggle for same-sex equality seemed like at the time that I started practicing human rights law. So it wasn't what got me interested in it. I actually was already quite interested in it, but it fired me up. It was such a blatant and unsupportable injustice. So that was kind of the rocket fuel that propelled me in that direction.
What was a pivotal moment in your career?
So one of the things that was really pivotal for me was being able to follow the pretty dramatic change in the ways that laws and policies began after decades of slow work, but began to coalesce around an understanding that LGBTQ persons can be really adversely affected by laws and policies that exclude protection and coverage or that deny their existence. And beginning in about the 2010s, what had started as slow, incremental, kind of gained momentum and took on speed, and the march toward marriage equality, which culminated in the Obergefell decision in 2015 at the Supreme Court, was a cataclysmic milestone in understanding, protecting, recognizing, and according dignity to LGBTQ communities. So that was huge in terms of the work that I have done and my fundamental faith in the law and legal systems as being able to make life better, to work for to make people's lives better.
What are your thoughts on the overturning of Roe v. Wade?
Yes, so the overturning of Roe v. Wade in 2022 in the Dobbs versus Jackson Women's Health Organization case has kept me pretty busy, very, very busy. And for all of the comments that I just made about my fundamental belief that the law exists and has huge potential to make people's lives better, you can also see that the law, the double-edged sword of the law, is that it can have really profound impact in the other direction. It can be a real driver or contributor to harming people, harming their health, both physical health and mental health. It's also made me really aware that public health research is incredibly important. It's through a lot of the surveillance that public health researchers conduct, looking at the impact of laws that ban abortion or severely restrict abortion, all of that's happened in the last 2 years in the wake of the reversal of Roe, that has been able to establish, to demonstrate the ways that these laws are harmful. And I continue to be hopeful that in time, the data that we are able to collect and the analyses that we're able to conduct with that data to establish the real and dramatic harms to people's lives will move lawmakers at a state-by-state basis to reform and try to protect access to abortion and to recognize that control over reproductive autonomy, control over when to have children or whether to have children or at what time in your life you will have children, that all our public health data can really play a role in moving the legislative and policy-making conversation.
What do you like to do to decompress?
I go to the gym. I like to run. I will often listen to public health or legal podcasts while I'm running and hope that they don't steal the bliss that you get from running. Your question about the reversal of Roe v. Wade, there have been, and then this past year in the Supreme Court term, it was a momentous term with a lot of implications for public health. And so more recently when I'm running, I'm deciding not to listen to some of the legal podcasts because I want to boost my mood rather than drop my mood down. But I like to run. I actually like to lift weights and work out in the gym. I have a dog who is wonderful. I like to play with him. At the end of the day, when I kind of shut my computer, I love to take him for a long walk.
What's the backstory behind the photo on your desk?
So this is a picture that came from the archives of the Baltimore Sun. And the picture was taken at the women's suffrage clinic, and it has 3 women. It was taken in May of 1972. Sorry, it was the Women's Suffrage Center, taken in May of 1972. For people who follow abortion and abortion law, do the sort of work I do, Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, and that was the case that made clear there was a constitutionally protected right to decide to have an abortion. So it gave people immense control, and states that had banned abortion, that criminalized it, could no longer do so. I had a student whose capstone research I supervised a number of years ago. She was an OBGYN who was here doing a family planning fellowship. And when she finished her program and submitted her capstone, she gave me this present as a gift. She was able to get it from the Baltimore Sun archives and framed it. And we were both really aware that this date of May 1972 was a year before there was a constitutional right to abortion. And here were these 3 women at a women's health clinic working on issues that were about to become a lot more protected 1 year later. So it's really a piece of history. And I will say, at the time that my former student gave me this, we were looking at this as history, and neither one of us imagined that the past would be prologue, and that Roe v. Wade, which was 1 year before its actual existence, would, several years after I received this photograph, be in fact the law of the land, sort of the pre-Roe era would be where we were living now. So that's what I meant, the past is prologue. We have many more tools in our arsenal to try to protect and provide access to abortion to people who, for the full spectrum of reasons, cannot be pregnant at the time that they are. But it is far more difficult, and this was a move backwards that I truly did not think we'd get to. So I'm looking at this now not as a piece of history, but as I'm hoping that this is something that can be inspirational to where we hope to go in the future.